Joining me today, we have two special guests, Chris Paxton, President of D3 Training Solutions, and Troy Ferguson, our Senior Product Manager. So Chris is going to be sharing some awesome information with us. Without further ado, I will shut up and I will let these two take it away.
Hey, everyone.
Hello, everybody. So again, Troy Ferguson, Chris Paxton, and we wanted to, last release with LECTORA, I believe it was 21.3, we did some improvements to our XLIFT process, and we're still continuing to do some improvements to that as well. But as we were going through this, coming from my previous roles as being just a learning administrator or a learning technology specialist or any of those, is you never get to that point when someone comes to you and they're ready to make content, or you've made this content and you never have that chance to prepare and say, okay, well, now I'm going to make my Spanish language course, and now I'm going to make my Italian language course, or, French Canadian. We've made this course and it's been out there for a year. And now it's like, hey, we need it in Spanish yesterday. And going through all this, I reached out to Chris. I was like, there's no better person, I thought, to explain from 0 to 100 and how to get to this for someone probably sweating in my same position, 10 years ago, of how do I make all these courses into Spanish. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Chris, and she's going to show us a little bit of her magic.
Okay, and can you guys see the screen? Is it working?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
Thank you. And I want to say hello, everyone. My preferred name, as I mentioned, is Chris. A lot of times you'll see it as Chrisana. I'm a white female in my early 50s. I wear glasses, have graying blonde hair, and my pronouns are she and her. And I also want to give a heads up that I do live in rural Oklahoma. The digital divide, or lack of broadband internet access, is alive and well. So I may need to turn my camera off if I start getting notifications about low bandwidth during the session. But I do want to thank you guys for having me here and sponsoring this session. And many of you guys may have attended one of my inclusion and accessibility sessions. And I really believe that, as Troy mentioned, authentic translation ties into accessibility and inclusivity, because studies show people learn better in their native language. Now, I've worked in HR and training and development since '98, and I've been an adjunct instructor at our local community college since 2000. And I talk about this a lot, actually, for authentic and local translations in my business courses in relation to marketing and advertising. So I'm really thrilled to share this information with the training and development world. So to kind of get to know you guys and your story a little bit more, and you can put this in the chat area, but how do you currently translate courses? And probably many of you guys very much like, because I'm right there with Troy, you get something done and it's like, oh, by the way, we needed that yesterday. In my case, when I worked for companies, it was primarily we'd need it in Spanish and French, but also we may need it in Cherokee. But we'll give some different examples here. And one of the things, though, I do love as you guys are answering that is, no matter what our role is, I really think that we work very hard to develop interesting, engaging, and educating courses. And since we work so hard, we want to make sure people can learn as well as they can. So, okay, and there's the chat. Perfect. Okay, Fiverr. Okay. Mandate to provide it in both language, English and French. Yes. Okay, primarily English. Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks you guys so much for sharing. I do want to promise you that even if you're only fluent in your native language, the process isn't nearly as daunting or intimidating as it can be if you can set up those basic steps to begin with. So let's go ahead and go through that. And many organizations are recognizing the need to translate e-learning courses for diverse learning communities, especially since there has been such a huge push, thanks to partially, let's say, maybe the pandemic, but that people, again, do learn better in their native language. We do want things to be inclusive, and that's, again, where this ties into it. But over the years, there have been some really pretty impressive marketing campaign translation mistakes. And I'm just going to share, a few of these for you guys, partially to make you laugh, because hopefully you'll remember then how important it is. But Come Alive with Pepsi, translated has Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the dead in China. Not great. Ford's every car has a high body quality was every car has a high quality corpse in Belgium. Coors Turn It Loose campaign, and so this kind of looks like maybe the 70s or 80s, was Suffer from Diarrhea in Spain. Braniff Airlines Fly in Leather, translated in Spanish as Fly Naked. Yeah, not really how I want to fly. Gerber, the French translation for that is to vomit. Okay, so how are we going to change our business name there? The Jolly Green Giant.
That one actually may be fair. That one may be
that one
fair
could be. That one
after-
could be, and especially since you're expecting, your third one, right? I think so.
Yeah, that's why it triggered something. I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yep. Nope. I'm right there with you. The Jolly Green Giant. I think someone mentioned English into Arabic. I'll actually give some examples of that specific translation today, but it, Got Milk translated into Are You Lactating in Mexico. The Green Giant translated into Intimidating Green Monster in Arabic. Coca-Cola, depending on, and this is where we talk about truly not just translating, but thinking about your regional dialects. And forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, but I think it's like kiku kila, which means either female horse stuffed with wax or bite the wax tadpole, depending on, in Chinese, depending on which dialect you're using. Siri, when it first came out, well, Siri in general, actually is a common slang term for butt in Japanese, but it's another term that I'm not going to use. And KFC's finger licking good was we'll eat your fingers off in China. So, there's definitely some translation mistakes, and I've got some training ones too that I've got to figure out how to incorporate in that, really could be, these are things that make us kind of laugh, but it really could be because we are talking about training and education can really mean life or death in many cases. So we laugh, but we really need to avoid this sometimes funny and often disastrous occurrence. Now, I posted this question actually to my LinkedIn network several months ago about translation challenges, and had some great responses. And I actually wanted to share their responses so they could actually get credit. But we can see, again, another example, English to Arabic, talking about total number of feet of all the animals on the farm. And the question, again, should be over. But they translate the word foot to foot, which represents a unit of measurement. And so, I'm sure that came up with an interesting one. We have double checking the meaning. So ahorta, means later. To others, it means right now. It could actually mean some negative connotations. Great example here, Google Translate. Again, I'm a part-time professor, and I tell my students all the time, maybe Google Translate for a word. Do not use a whole document, but there's several examples where training has actually been completely translated using Google Translate, and that is not, it's not going to come out with the outcome that you're wanting in most cases. Some other examples, again, it's not just the words that we're talking about, but it's also your images, which we will reference. And again, we can see on this one from Jennifer talking about the images. So the images look different for the standard outlets, depending on where you're posting those. And again, Tim Slade talked another example with this Google Translate. So today what we're going to do, again, laughing about those translation mistakes, but the good news is these mistakes can be easily avoided if you choose to follow certain steps. So we're going to talk about what are those important authentic translation and localization and why it's important and what I can do to fix that. Things you can do to fix those challenges, and how, again, this global strategy will help. And oftentimes you'll hear me talk about style guides, and this can fall into that style guide. What I consider the 6 steps for authentic translation and localization. And then we'll end with some translation tips and how LECTORA can really make translating your course easy or easier than it could be. So why is this important? Well, as mentioned, over 20 years ago, when I first started talking about this in the business world, the focus really was on the importance of international markets and marketing. but the world seems to become smaller and smaller all the time. So we need to embrace that we're becoming a global melting pot of many languages, cultures, and translations. There are over 332 million people in the US, which sounds huge, but again, why limit ourselves just to this when there's over 7.8 billion potential customers and learners and maybe employees around the world. Okay, that's a huge difference in number. And more companies have employees working all over the world, again, partially thanks to the pandemic. And items are also being shipped from one side to the other, machinery manufactured, parts and pieces, and it happens just all over. And one course on how to operate it may be translated into 13 languages before you know it. So in addition, with these changing times of digital transformation or lockdowns, again, due to the pandemics, working and learning remotely has become really this new normal, which I know we all probably hate that term, but that's used in a good way. And keeping this remote workforce engaged while personalizing their training and development needs are some of the challenges that we as organizations, universities, corporations around the world are dealing with, because we know that learners not only prefer to learn in their native language, but they actually will retain the content better, keeping, again, them more engaged, more motivated, and keeping that sense of inclusion. So what is it that you can do? Well, if you have employers that maybe think we don't necessarily need to do this, think about inclusion. Big topic here. Are your courses, if they are authentically translated with localization, and we'll define that here in a minute, it will mean you are inclusive and it empowers your team members and your clients around the globe and all cultures, again, to see themselves in the content. And we know that seeing ourselves is very important too. We know that that knowledge is better absorbed and it engages and improves their understanding and comprehension. It then increasing the accuracy, again, of your content without relying, again, on that in-person instructor or translator. And you'll hopefully actually gain some respect within your company and your industry by demonstrating that you really are committed to training employees in that fully inclusive manner in a way that works best for them. Okay. And again, if you guys have questions, you can type them in the chat or type them in the QA area. So thanks so much. So what are some challenges? Well, some of the typical challenges we hear, of course, are budget, estimate, timeline. Timeline is huge. Again, that training and those go live dates. Oh, we need this done. And yes, it was approved in English, and now we need it in these 4 other languages yesterday. Your translation revisions, the partners that you use, the file transfer. And one of the things I like to sometimes point out to clients, and again, that could be internal or external, and this is something I was shown in grad school, but it's that whole time, cost time, and a value, okay? And you kind of get to choose two. If you're wanting it really fast, and you're wanting it good, you're probably not going to get it cheap. If you're wanting it cheap and you're wanting it fast, you're probably not going to have that quality. So kind of keep some of that in mind when it comes time for our planning. So, okay, so what can we do? And I mentioned that global strategy. Well, translating a course simply means converting the course from its original language to the target language. And that seems easy enough. But we need to ensure that we have the accuracy of all the text and the narration to that target language, which again, kind of seems easy enough. But the biggest thing is the way the content is presented. We need to think about the images and the language tone that needs to be, again, culturally acceptable. And this is what's referred to as that localization. Okay, and that's really kind of the difference between just translation and localization. Before you even consider translating the content, you need to understand your global strategy. Make sure you understand your target audience, the foreign market, the messaging, the branding. Even something as simple as color schemes can greatly impact how content is received, because colors like white is seen different in some countries than it is in others. The same is true with the reds and your greens and different things. So that being said, you need to create some type of basic guidelines for your content creators to adhere to. So one of the things I encourage you to do is develop a glossary and create some type of style guide or add to your current style guide. This will help you make sure you have your translation goals and timelines that can be more easily met, and ensures that those courses accurately reflect the subject matter and content of the original course. And we'll talk about what goes in that here momentarily. Some things to remember even when we're thinking about this, though, is also try to avoid idiosms, colloquialisms, acronyms, and all the isms, and cultural analogies. Whew. Yeah, English really is my native language sometimes, I think. Each language has common sayings that don't necessarily translate well, and these occur more often than you think. And I've used some in this session already. Some of the sayings in the United States might not make any sense to not only people with another culture or language, but again, also thinking that neurodiversity scale. Phrases like ants in your pants, bite your tongue, getting your ducks in the row, hitting the sack, antsy, so forth. Those are things that we really shouldn't use, okay? Because you may need to really explain them to our international learners, or again, those on the neurodivergent scale. We also need to be careful about acronyms, as they can mean so much to so many different people. And years ago, I was in the telecom world, and we used to have this big giant book, literally this thick, so about 2 to 3 inches thick. It would be updated about every other year with just telecommunications and communications acronyms and terms, and it was crazy. And we're still seeing that today. We use a lot of terms, and as this younger generation comes into the workforce, they still, whether it's through the memes or through their phone, they still have all kinds of terms and acronyms that we need to make sure that everybody can understand what we're talking about. And often they may not, so we need to define those. We also need to, in addition to some of this, and this kind of ties in together, is keep your using simple language and shorter sentences, especially for straightforward content such as technical training, health and safety assessments. My undergrad was in journalism, and one of the things they taught us was to write at an 8th grade level. Now, granted, that was 30-something years ago. So that's another way to think about this. And please note, I don't mean that people can't read and comprehend at a higher level. It's just that our brains are basically computers, and we're speed reading and trying to get this content so fast because we're bombarded with so much information each day that they're actually now saying, instead of an 8th grade level, do it at a 6th grade level. Okay, and that means that everyone, no matter where they are on their educational level and scales, they will hopefully have an easier time understanding. And those who are reading quickly, which most of us are, can also understand and get that information quickly. So just something to keep in mind. We also want to keep in mind the text expansion and contraction. And this ties back into it. So edit down the English or other source language so it really includes that concise wording. Okay, ensures translation is more likely to come back clean, and the project scope is now narrowed. A lot of times, if you outsource translation firms, they will charge by the word, so you'll really be saving some money there. But check for those clauses or phrases to see if they can be reduced for that simpler construction. We also need to understand the format. So an example, actually, let's talk about the length. So in English, if we said see you tomorrow, again, it's been years since I've had my French, but à demain in French takes up a smaller amount. And I can't remember why I wrote the amount of sizing, and then dates. Date format is different many times within many countries, and sometimes even within many industries. Here in the US, we primarily write the month, the day, the year. Yet in other places, it's the year, the month, the day. I've also seen the day, the month, the year. That can completely change people's interpretations of what they're looking at depending on what they're used to. So be aware of what formatting everything is written in, again, to help with that localization. We also need to be aware of all of our visual content. Be conscious of your color schemes. I mentioned earlier about how white looks a little different, or could be interpreted a little different depending on where they are. Avoid embedding text in your graphics, since again, that really is impossible to translate. It also isn't good for 508 or WCAG. But we also need to be conscious of those images. Images are extremely useful in maximizing the impact of the content's message. And they can also, though, hinder your ability to reach that wider audience if you don't choose diverse and inclusive images. So keep the gestures innocuous, attire modest for women and men. Choosing that wrong type of image for people in particular can cause your learners really just to focus on that image and what's wrong with the image and not really what you're trying to say, okay? So they may be disengaged, or worse, they may be offended, which I know is not what we want. Okay, so what are these 6 steps? I went over kind of an overview, what we need to do. Well, the first step of efficient translation is to prepare the materials for the translation process in general. And hopefully this is done early on because you've set up that global strategy and you've set up a glossary and a style guide, and we'll reference those a little bit more. But once that's done, you can actually begin the translation step. So it's, again, a little more work up front, especially the first couple times you do it, but I promise you it will be worth it based on your time and your money in the long run. So the first thing we want to do, why is my inner not going there? Okay, is to review those expectations with your client or your subject matter expert or your SME. It is common knowledge that translation really is a human endeavor. Please don't just use Google Translate. And several people have posted about Fiverr, meaning, again, it needs to be reviewed by internal native speakers. Definitely. It is one of those, again, when I'm teaching my students and they say they may be fluent in reading and writing in this language, I also often ask, well, are you also fluent in translating? Because there is a difference. I may be able to speak the language, I may be able to read the language, but can I really translate it and understand globally or regionally what certain things actually mean? So I won't just say it's more than using, again, that native speaker for the translation, because this translator needs to be an expert not only in the language, but the art of that language formation. They need to be, if possible, a qualified, certified translator, as there's all kinds of nuances out there and dialects that they really need to catch. I can translate something into French, but am I translating it to Canadian French, or am I translating it to France French? What about Spanish? Am I translating it to kind of the middle of the US Spanish? Am I translating it to Mexico Spanish? Am I translating it to Spain Spanish? I mean, there's some real big differences there. So when we think about that language choice, we also, again, need to be aware of those cultural preferences. Okay, where will you be using this course? Could it also be an African country where French is spoken? If we're translating in, again, this is where that global cultural localization comes into forefront, because we may need to use images that are specific to each culture if the course will be used in 2 different locations around the world, because users need to be able to see and hear themselves in the course for it really to be relatable. So what are steps? Kind of just talking about this, you're going to review and prepare it. Most people normally prepare it in English to make sure it's correct in that sense. You're going to export that text. We'll talk about that here in a moment. It will then be translated. You will import it back. Then you will need to sync your audio and your actions, and there's a couple different ways that you can go about doing that. And then, of course, the QA before we do the final release. So I had several courses to choose from for my examples, but most of them were translated into things like Cherokee, but I didn't think we'd probably have a whole lot of Cherokee speakers on here, but into French, Spanish, or German. And I can read or speak a little of each of those. So I wanted to share, this is a little bit older course. It was done with You Achieve out of Canada, but it was the most challenging to do, as I don't read or speak Arabic at all. LECTORA's authoring platform makes it really easy to take one course's source language and provide that translated, localized copy that can then again be published and presented to that target audience. So if you're not familiar, while the US here, we read from left to right, we take our page, we turn it again from the right over to the left. If you're doing it in Arabic, it is right to left. So we had to adjust everything. So not only was the text, everything flipped, but we had to make sure the pages actually went, you know, they would grab the left-hand page and turn it to the right. So, I mean, it was really challenging in my mind to get this going. So this is what we're going to do is take a look at this in combination, LECTORA, with the expertise of hopefully an LSP, which is a language service provider. This can really make your translations hopefully quite a bit easier. So this is the example we're going to look at. So what was the first thing we had to do? Well, first thing we did was, again, remove all those embedded text from the images because, as I've mentioned, if you can, try not to use that in general. It's not good for accessibility reasons. It's also not good for translation. So just in my mind, try to get out of that habit. It can't be translated, so it forces you to actually reproduce materials without embedded text. Again, that can cost you time and money. Then what you're going to want to do is check your fonts. Because there are so many amazing fonts out there and open source free fonts, they've really made it easier for designers to be artistic. And Forbes magazine actually wrote an article several years ago about web design trends, and the article mentioned being on the lookout for more of these, exotic fonts to accompany, again, kind of that minimalist trend design. That's kind of that wow and that pop is in the font. And the article mentioned that these artistic and calligraphy type fonts are becoming popular because they really feel personal and they really feel tangible. And while these free fonts seem to be an amazing dream for many of us, the challenge comes through in there's several things. One, not every font is as professionally designed as the next. So it may work, again, on a PC machine, but it may not work well in a Apple machine. I've recently run into that with some issues. But also not every font has as many variations or weights or the proper kerning, which is kind of that space in between. It's kerning and leading, and I think we usually just refer to it as the space between the letters. But these characters, they may also have certain glyphs or items that are actually missing. And so when you translate it into this language, again, their alphabet, their letters, their glyphs really are different than ours. And so if that isn't there, that font isn't going to work. Let's see. Again, check for one of the biggest things in looking at this. Actually, let me go back a quick. When you're thinking about checking the fonts, make sure again that they have all those needed characters. Roboto is really good for English and many other languages that use kind of that Latin script. Cyrillic, Cyrillic, I think is how it's spelled, is really good for Greek. Other scripts like Hebrew, Chinese, Thai, they often really just stick with that Arial because that way you'll have all the graphs and the glyphs and everything that you'll actually need. You also want to take into consideration that text expansion. Leave enough room for the text and respect the nuances of each of those individual languages. In some languages, punctuation is definitely different. Thai actually uses no punctuation, so only spacing is used to separate the sentences. And while accents may be used in other languages like French or Spanish, you need to kind of brush up, if you can, on some of that linguistic investigation skills and be prepared to scan that document accordingly. While following generalizations are debated in the translating community, some basic guidelines are, and this is all kind of compared to English, is that Hebrew tends to be about a third larger as far as taking up space. Hebrew is a third shorter. French is a fourth longer. Scandinavian, really almost word for word with the expectation of Swedish, which tends to be longer, otherwise it translates well. German almost always expands by 10 to 30%. Mandarin may contrast by 20 to 50%. So, I mean, there's all kinds of percentages and things that you can read up and learn about. And this can be very challenging when we're translating, again, kind of doing that layout and design. So that's one of the first things we need to take into consideration. We also, as mentioned, we need to check for those images, review the material for potential issues, check for text on images to see if they need to be translated, if they need to be recreated at all. Be sure the content is generalized and needed. And as we saw again from one of those LinkedIn posts earlier about a course that was translated into multiple languages where they didn't do an overall check, and no one realized until it was after it had already been published and it was too late that the content was instructing European countries about the electrical safety using American standards, because they were showing 220 plugs and 110 versus the plugs that they use in their particular countries.
I've never even thought of that. And it's like, before you go every time, it's like one of the things you have on your checklist is, do I have the right adapter? So like, that's, oh, wow. Learning something every time.
Yeah. And it's again, it's who would have thought? So definitely, sometimes I'll even check what type of, cups do they have? I mean, are they drinking tea? In many cultures, soda, things like that isn't done. It's definitely tea, and it's certain types of cups and things. And so that could be considered offensive if you didn't have the proper. So one of the things I actually will say I love about the ELB Learning Library is you can actually go through and adjust the search and choose different countries for different looks. And I don't know if everybody has gone through and adjusted that with the filters. So that has been, I found, very handy. So, okay, so what do I do next? Well, the next thing I'm going to do, and again, showing in LECTORA here, because it is from my experience, and I have licenses to kind of the big three software rapid development tools, it is definitely the easiest to work with, in my opinion, when I'm doing translation. So now I'm going to export my text. Okay, seems simple enough, but how do I do that? Well, I'm going to go into my Tools tab, and I'm going to check a little button that says Export. It's going to ask me a couple questions, because the software is going to provide a simple way to export all of your content basically into a single file. This is going to serve as a source language document used either by your translator itself, or if you're actually hiring someone, that language service provider or LSP. And then they're going to use that to translate, and then you can actually just import it back in versus retyping this stuff. So once we translate, and I think I've got images going on here, hang on. I have allergies. Once that either you're using an RTF file, in this particular case, in the screenshot, I've got an XLIF file. Once that has been exported, that file can be sent to whoever's translating, which handles the rest of the translation and that localization. In some cases, organizations will need to send supplemental material such as your videos, other multimedia, which again needs to be translated and adjusted. And once that content has been localized for that new language, the LECTORA platform actually offers a very simple importing option to return it. So what do we do? What's going to ask us our format? Okay, simple enough. Then we're going to choose the scope of the text that we want to extract. So you may only want to translate a specific page, a section, a chapter, rather than your entire file or title. So that's really handy, because of course I'm probably going to start off with I say this. Before I usually hire a company, I will send one page to several different companies or translators, and just to kind of see how it comes across. And then I will send it opposite to the others for the testing, just so I can kind of narrow down who I want to use and what is working best. So that's how I usually start. When it's actually time to translate, then I'll go ahead and do the entire project. But let's say there's been some changes made. I may only need to then translate or export basically a page or a chapter. I don't have to do the whole thing all over again, thus saving me some time and money. Okay, whoops, okay, sorry, I was thinking a chat came in there. Whoops, let me go back a second there. Then it's going to go through and ask me about do I want to include the images and the button names if you're developing content that needs to be accessible. Oregon 508 compliant, and many other countries are also looking, they don't refer to it as 508, but it would be your WCAG, and that would again be that global standard for accessibility. So in that case, I'm going to say yes, I do want those buttons because they also need to be translated. And it may ask the recommended, naming convention is normally your course title, and then whatever language it's going to be in. So in this particular case, it would be Selling Essentials Arabic, Selling Essentials French, Selling Essentials, I go ahead and do the English version too, just so everything is correctly labeled. In LECTORA, then we will specify where we want that exported translation file, and we click OK. So easy peasy in that sense. Then what we're going to see is we're going to get this RTF file. And Troy, RTF stands for, do you know?
Rich text format.
Rich text format. Thank you. Whew, it's one of those days. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm super happy with myself that I have finally passed that certain test. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make it here. I'm going to make it all right.
I'm so proud of Troy.
Thank you.
For how quickly he answered that.
And woo!
And
man,
I promise you, we did not plan that ahead of time. So
no, I'm going to walk out of here just
walking
all right,
on air.
back to it.
We're going to get that RTF file, that rich text format file. And then you are going to, and basically what I did is I opened it up in Excel just so I could really see what it looks like. But you're going to send that file over again to your translator or your translating company. And when this is created, there's a couple of important tips and tricks that you should share or implement again in your process. Put it in your style guide. This will include text that must not be altered. And I've got a screenshot of that, I believe a little later, of what must not be altered. And the text is normally displayed in red and is similar to things like do not edit this line, .45, things like that. It will also come across though, but we can really see it just breaks it down line for line. You can open the document in Notepad, WordPad, anything like that. I will say be cautious of opening things in the Microsoft formats because sometimes Word transfers some additional unseen characters, which can cause spacing or phantom objects really on that page. So try to stick to some of those true RTF readers to open this in. Check the document again for any white text to make sure everything is copied across and not necessarily stuff that you didn't see. And when the text changes have been made, you will get something in this particular example that looks like this. And again, notice, because again, whereas we read from left to right, they read from right to left. So the first time I looked at this, I was like, oh, what in the world? Thinking I had to align. I was like, no, this is also showing the way the alignment and everything needs to work. And then I can take that file and I can import it back into my original title. So let's go ahead and follow the next step here in a minute. So once I do that and I import it in, you may be a little nervous, okay? And it's completely understandable. And that's why you should select a limited amount of content to translate and test for accuracy and consistency, or when interviewing another company to see how they would work. That translation sample will give all prospective collaborators an idea of how the process works and establishes expectations for all future translation projects. It is critical that all the previous steps have kind of been completed before that sample is sent over if you want the best idea of how that translation process will flow. Then they're going to do a comprehensive review. Okay, again, do that really early in the process to make sure they're meeting your needs. Again, as the Fiverr mentioned, the internal, make sure it's reviewed by those native speakers. It's coming across. They're actually not just using Google Translate or some other app that's out there. And I really suggest that you have one person lined up to do this task so it can be completed relatively quickly and effectively. Sometimes if you have too many people reviewing, it can create some different bottlenecks. A word you wanted to avoid in a translated course, they really think it needs to be in there type of thing. So if you don't have native speakers of the target language, you can also, again, a lot of times that translation companies can provide the service. They find a native speaker to do the specialized review. And yeah, major reviews take a long time. And this is why I really would encourage that first review just to see how the process works, because then you're going to make sure everybody understands that. And then you're going to finish the translations process. And then you're going to do that major review because they want to make sure it matches not really word for word, but intent for that localization, because again, that word for word can really cause you some problems. Goodness. I already mentioned the client subject matter expert review. Then you're going to, again, check those images and graphics, making sure that not everything in there is a white 20-year-old female from the US our dress codes are a little different. It's one of the things I was teaching my students yesterday about the business dress. We are a lot more casual also here in the United States in our dress code. And many other countries still dress up a little bit more as far as business-wise and maybe a little more conservative. So, these are some things that you really need to look at. And that's something that even if you don't speak the language, you can definitely go through and look at those graphics and images very carefully. As I mentioned, so we've done that. We now take our imported text, and very much like what we did before, I'm going to go back to my Tools tab. I'm going to select on Translation, and now instead of Export, okay, which was the radio button I selected, I'm now going to select Import. It's going to again ask me what format, either that rich text or an XLIFF, which is your XML localization interchange file format, I believe, maybe interface, but I believe it's interchange. There are 3 export formats. They're popular with today's language service providers, which is again why they're offered. So a lot of people are like, well, I can't open it. A lot of it's really more for them and their software. Again, you're going to ask for the scope. Is it the entire project? It is a page? Is it a chapter? What is it? You'll select import, and as many languages result in these longer text strings, it's a good idea to select the option increase the text block size if it is needed. So if you do that, it will automatically increase the size of the text blocks to adjust to accommodate that larger text, which can be helpful. And otherwise, you may have to spend a long time manually adjusting the text blocks to fit some of those resulting text. Your strict RTF filtering, basically some translation tools and applications may have, again, some of those additional unwanted characters or symbols that may appear. And if you're experiencing that, just go back and check strict RTF. A lot of times I don't do that the first go around, but if I notice kind of a bunch of headers and junk coming through, then I'll re-import it and I'll select that icon there. Once after the content is imported, users will likely need to again go through that course, make adjustments to the layout based on changes to that text size. LECTORA does again offer that option to increase those boxes, but you're still going to want to go through and make sure all the formatting is correct and it looks fine. And again, you browse and click OK. Now, the challenge is once your course is put back together in that target language, you might feel you're done, but this is really where that work for us developers begins, as we know our course. So I really encourage you, even if you don't know the language, to take that original course and do a side-by-side screen comparison with the translated course. Now, you may think this is wasted time as you don't speak the translated language, which is why I wanted to use my Arabic, because I don't speak that at all. But the point is to follow along to the sound of the words and compare the original text with the transcript, making sure all the text has been included. And you'll also be checking to make sure the text, the images, the graphics, they're really where they need to be, and they appear on the screen if you're doing animations when they need to appear. If you have animations or it's appearing with the audio text, what I would suggest doing is also when they're listening, making sure it's okay, highlight what words, something needs to happen and have them give you the time that occurs. And that way you can just go in and make those time adjustments. Let's see. Again, step 6 has several people have commented on about those reviews and the revisions taking time. Definitely. With the initial translation complete, this is when you really start your quality control with your deliverables. Review each language version using a professional proofreading service, and there actually are professional proofreaders out there. They will assess the quality and test them again on those sample audiences. And again, this is something the company you hire may also provide, so just check with them. Also check and make sure everything works correctly in your LMS or your LRS. The testing should include for those technical functionalities that includes all that interaction, the audio files are synchronizing correctly, the accuracy of the language, as this final check will ensure the best e-learning translation quality. Once everything is imported and the content has been reviewed, the course really is ready for live testing and then that publication. So what are some of those final steps that I encourage you to do is afterwards do like a project plan. Do that follow-up and verify all your project instructions were completed. comments have been reviewed, they've been reconciled. The glossary, the style guide have been followed and updated if necessary, because this is kind of a living, I mean, language is a living item, which means your style guide and references to this for translation needs to be a living item too. And gather all this together, including the project related files and content and stuff, and store them together. So, what are some last minute tips that I can give you? Some of the biggest issues I run into poor planning. Almost every e-learning translation mistake can be solved by one or two things, either experience or planning. So please don't skip that crucial stage of the project, and know, again, that global strategy and setting up that glossary and that style guide can really help, especially if you're I know at one point in time I worked for a trucking company and we had to do a lot of translations into Spanish. And even the local college professor that we hired was like, I'm not sure some of these flatbed trucking terms in Spanish. So we had to do quite a bit of research for that. But we put that in a style guide and glossary and use that also to teach our internal employees on some of this. Could also be, again, those low quality translations. Without that correct quality control processes in place, the risk of those low quality translations is huge for large projects of this nature. Inconsistent language. This is another common challenge on these large scale projects, especially when technical or that niche language is present, because you have terms that may not be taught in your normal everyday foreign language course. Whoops, go through there. Also, again, embedded text. This is stuff that, again, can't necessarily be translated by our exporting. It's going to have to be manually done, forcing you to reproduce those materials without that embedded text. So to save yourself some time, financial costs, just eliminate those to begin with. Layout breaks, failing to design for that text expansion or contraction can lead to layout breaks within that user interface, which is going to look odd after you've done so much work to make, again, that same look and feel correctly. And the same is true kind of with those images and videos. Not creating and localizing images and video content with translation in mind can result in a lot of problems post-production. So again, planning is essential, because I've mentioned that several times. And last but not least, poor localization. Good localization helps the content optimization, allowing you to make that translation more efficient and deliverable. And again, you don't want to bring your entire e-learning project to a standstill. So again, I hate to say plan, but planning is really a huge process. Okay, so my favorite advice for you guys to streamline this, and I say this in a lot of my courses because I can't say it enough, is create some type of style guide. When possible, provide a document with all those general guidelines, as well as sourceless language for reference, maybe common words to be used, maybe what those words are in the different languages, the difference between the abbreviations, which again need to be kept, and which ones need to be replaced. Slang that is, because you may have some slang that's appropriate to use. If not, let's pull it out. And instructions on whether or not you're going formal or informal, because again, different languages many times will have, again, that formal. If I'm speaking French, am I doing or Spanish even, am I doing it in the formal, personal, or the formal, or the informal? So, document that. Create a template. This goes along again with the style guide and may have notes or text blocks already set up or sized to the different text differences. So a lot of times your pages may be a little bit longer, or you may have more pages just to help adjust for those text blocks differences. And again, if you set through any of my sessions that I've ever done with anything, I always say create library objects. Succeeding in any business takes, again, there's work and effort with changes, but when we think about the term culture, that's those values, beliefs, and rules. So if we set up a library object of the items that we know works, I'm not going to have to go back and look it up. It's all right there. LECTORA stores it all for me, and again, saves me a ton of time. So I've said this many, many times. I love, love, love my library objects. So, and I would encourage you guys to learn more about other countries and cultures. One of my favorite books out there, and I've actually recently connected to the author, Terry Morrison, is Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. I was introduced to this book in grad school, and I have an international business certificate which meant a whole extra 9 hours, but I was like, sure, why not? Never knew way back when how much that would help, but we were introduced to this version of the book, and it's one of those that is used before businesses send an employee to a country to represent them. Many times they will educate them on how they greet them, what they do they bring presents, do they show up on time, how far do they address, what, there's certain business rules that every country has, and this addresses a lot of that. To me, fine, we may not physically be going to those countries, but in order for us to do our best to make sure we're hitting that localization and we're aware of kind of what to look for and what not to look for in those countries, this book has been just a lifesaver for me. And I can't speak enough. And she's got some online stuff with it too. So. Okay, and so yeah, went over this. What are the translation, localization? Why is it important? What are the challenges? My 6 steps. Sorry, my dog is saying hello if you can hear that. Sorry about that. He's saying he's not included in there. So some tips and tricks and why it can be beneficial for you all. And so then I always put this one in for when I did another session, but again, LECTORA also, or ELB, has some amazing reference books out there. So I would encourage you guys to take a look at that. And of course, you can get a free trial of LECTORA. But what questions do you guys have?
For someone coming through, one of go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh no, go ahead, Troy.
No,
I'm not a paid spokesperson. Let me clarify that.
No. One of the you touched on it there, and a little bit more about planning or anything, and really you don't even think about it. But when it comes to inclusivity in your training and stuff, and having that other, I always think of justification isn't the right word, but considerations that we take for granted ahead of time and things, and it's I think about it, my previous background in heavy equipment and stuff, and how many other users did we not alienate, but did we not provide like the training that they really could have gotten the most out of their jobs with, just that little bit of what you were saying is making it more inclusive. So it's really important.
It is. And also, if I've had people ask about the link to, or where do I get my images, and I think in this one, 100% is from the ELB library. One of the things I like is one of the choices you have, not only by age, although I don't like y'all's term of seniors because I don't think I look that old, but okay. But they also have by different ethnicities, different casual business, things like that. So it's one of those that if I forget that, wait, am I including people? A lot of times I'll just go through and search. Do I have someone that kind of fits this look? Do I have someone that fits this look? Just because the last thing I know, and I don't think anyone does it intentionally, but we don't want to exclude people. I cannot imagine that we would want to. And this can make us just consciously think that, how are we going to see? Are all the females represented as the secretary? It's just some things to think about. So we can take that a step further and do it with language, making sure everybody feels inclusive.
Yeah, and it's right there for you.
And I think it was Paul. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to go that. Whoa, wrong way. So that's my university background there. So there is, I think, Polly, great comment there. In an ideal world, you need to know that the course will be translated when you design it. Definitely.
Yeah.
That would completely be ideal. I would hope if you work for a company, once they do it once, they'll start kind of thinking that they need to do it many times, but they may not. So, but I also like to design in general with white space in mind, just because I don't know what the future is going to hold.
Mm-hmm. Oh, currently designing a course in 13 languages. Polly is. I definitely think this can help. But you're right. It's still all the other portions of. I'm with you, Polly. But all the other portions, like Chris is talking about, is the longest part of it. LECTORA is a great tool to shorten, like we were saying, the review cycle time and publishing that content out quicker. but you're right.
And I didn't
The
even
outside.
And I didn't even mention review link. Review link
Yeah.
can be so helpful to publish out there too. So again,
Yes.
they can do the review again in their own language. But Paul, it sounds like Polly's suffering from some scope creep there, that the goalpost keeps changing. And yeah,
I think from my background, Polly, just up until 6 months ago, I was a customer of ELBs and creating content is really push for one and show it being successful. And then, the more couple of successful projects you tick off, there tends to be more breathing space to get the other ones accomplished. And so the goal was he always finished his own.
Just decided to move to massive courses.
We launch on Monday. Oh no.
It
Okay.
sounds like Polly needs a drink or a massage or
All of the above.
some sort of stress relieving.
All of the above. There she is. There she is.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, as learning and training administrators, as Chris and I are, I can tell you, like, I'm already getting the cold sweats for you. And no, if anything, reach out to the ELB team and get people involved, and then Chris as well. Her materials and her things are just tremendous.
One of the things you guys, ELB is actually launched out on, I believe, is y'all now do, I don't know the term, the
staff augmentation.
Thank you, staff augmentation. Yes.
What I'm here for.
Yay. Words that can help out on some of this stuff too, which is great.
Yeah.
And the two people who decided this today are now off. Of course they are. Of course. Yeah, off until Monday. I gotta love it sometimes.
Sorry, Polly.
Yeah.
But we're here for you. Both, like Chris said, she's not even a paid spokesperson, but that's the thing that LECTORA has really done for both of us, is just being able to bridge this gap. And really, we really hope we can be a benefit to you and help you get this stuff done, because that's what it's about, is making your job easier.
Exactly. I've always joked that LECTORA's changed my life, and it really has, because I started out as instructional design and moved on up into managing a team of developers, and then realized I don't like being in management. I just want to do the work. And so, but I go back and think to when my manager at the time handed me the book and said, "Here, learn LECTORA." And it was like, and where would I be without that? And LECTORA's changed my life. So
where would I be without you learning LECTORA? That is. Well, thank you guys very much. Chris, thank you as always for everything. And Stephanie, any closing remarks?
Well, Chris already did my job and posted a slide about getting a free trial of LECTORA. So that was great. I don't even need to take over the screen sharing. I posted a link to it in the chat as well. We'll be sharing this recording. You'll get it in your email tomorrow. And I guess the last thing that I would say is, if you are a LECTORA user or want to become a LECTORA user, join the Rockstars community. That is our forums where, if you're having trouble with a specific module and you're like, I want to do this is my vision, I don't know how to get there, you can post that in the community, and then awesome people like Chris or Troy or other users will weigh in and they'll tell you how to get there, which is great resource. And then, as Troy said, we at ELB are always here to help you. We want to make your learning better. We want to help you create awesome learning experiences. So just reach out to us with any questions. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you on our next webinar, hopefully.